Welcome to Curious and Unqualified, a podcast about life in academia. I'm Eric Edlund, professor of physics.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Jimenez. I'm a professor in the Foundations and Social Advocacy Department, nestled in the Education School.
Well, this is our, I don't know, what is it, our seventh or fifth
I thought it was the first podcast. It's a seventh iteration of episode 1, yes.
For various reasons and a lot of history we're not going to go into right now, we have started and stopped this podcast. I think we probably made it as far as episode 2 or 3 at one point, and then we kept restarting. So this is, I don't know what iteration we're on, but this is episode 1 officially.
Yes, and this is, but also every episode will be called episode 1. I think that's something we think we're going to do.
Maybe we should just call the show episode 1.
And we probably get more hits, right? That work with the Google search algorithms, right? Because every podcast has that episode 1.
Unless every episode 1 sucks, and then no one wants to listen to it.
So I saw this movie not too long ago, Aniara. Interesting movie, space flick, kind of about the parable about the end of the world. And there's just one scene really stuck with me. And there was a scene, I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but let's just say, spoiler alert, people are stuck in a spaceship that's heading into deep space and they can't stop it. And so basically people are doomed, right? But they're trying to keep people working and motivated, and there's hope that they could do something to repower the ship to turn around, etc. But there's a scene where there's they call this thing called tensile theory. I don't even know if this is even a real theory. Maybe you would know if there's a thing called tensile theory. They might have just made it up.
Tensile or tensor?
Tensile, like Tensile.
Okay.
Yeah. It's probably just like a fictional thing. Yeah. But it's like a classroom scene where there's these like high school age students on this ship, and there's like a teacher teaching them. And like you can just see in their eyes this like dead look, right? This look of just like they kind of know this is pointless, but like, okay, I guess we have to try to like learn things in case we can use this knowledge to turn the ship around. And I think it's a fitting metaphor for like higher education today, because every word and every email, there's like this nestled kind of like dread fear about like the hard austerity times that are here and that will only get worse. And I think the big famous Ivy type schools like Harvard and Stanford, they're doing fine, right? They've got the endowments, they've got no shortage of tuition enrollments. But most other colleges in the U.S. and perhaps many places in the world are suffering for reasons of the demographic cliff. People, the college debt too high. People don't feel college is worth it. And so, budget cuts are the order of the day. And it's kind of interesting to be teaching and living in that context where, like, it's hard to imagine things could ever get better, and the best case scenario is how long can we keep the status quo before we accept it's going to dip a little bit more. So
are you talking about, you mentioned austerity and the financial situation that we're facing here. Are you thinking strictly in terms of what's happening in higher education, or are you thinking about kind of more globally with stability? Because I can imagine that this movie was also the starship heading into space, where they've lost control, is a metaphor for our situation on Earth.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So they're effectively riding to their doom and demise with no way to turn the ship around.
Oh, and I think actually that's a very fit metaphor. Yeah, I think I'm on team. I know it's very tempting, emotionally appealing to blame the elites or the fossil fuel companies, right? And I won't pretend that they have no blame in the situation, but yeah, I think basically no one's steering the ship, right? This global industrial civilization is this monstrous beast. This bureaucracies have been formed. It's largely out of our control at this point. And so I think it is a metaphor for everything. Higher education is embedded in institutions and systems that are in decline because there's no longer the resource base to support them for a variety of reasons, limits to growth. And but we're obviously living in higher education, right? So that's why I'm focusing on the specific things happening in higher education. I think would be interesting to talk about.
So, but the analogy then of the malaise the students were exhibiting in the classroom for us is that that malaise that we might encounter on occasion. Is that do you think its origin is from the situation in higher education specifically, or is that a result of a more global, or if not global exactly, something larger than the college?
Well, yeah. The malaise was more about just like how that made me think about like what people do and how they might shut down when they realize things are hopeless. I don't think I see that widespread in our students yet, but I will say I see it more every year, right? Like I see the ratio of students that have that kind of look of like, hey, I'm just kind of here that's what I'm supposed to do, right? I don't know if I really believe that all this matters, but I'm going through the motions, etc. I won't even go so far as to say the majority of students, but it's from like the one or two in the class to like a creepingly growing minority of
Yeah,
students.
it's a substantial force that you encounter now, and it really sets a tone for the
Yes,
class that's
very
really
much
hard to overcome, right?
Yeah, and I think COVID's probably the most proximate cause, right? Like, especially now, the students we're teaching now, their high school experience was COVID, right? Lockdowns of all kind of sorts, online learning and all that, and disconnection. And so it's not all COVID, but I think that really is what like set this kind of tone for the disengagement. Because I mean, like, and students will tell you, right? Most students like, oh yeah, like I learned nothing during COVID, right? Like I did nothing during COVID. I cheated. Everything was so easy. I didn't care. And yeah, there hasn't really been much of a bounce back from that nadir, right? And so again, I still feel there's many motivated students and that are interested in learning and they're engaged, but the ratio of students you sense are just there because they're going through the motions is certainly growing. Yeah, and it's a shadow and a wisp of what I saw in that film, and a dark harbinger of things possibly to come, probably to come.
Yeah, I see I think
Unless
like
we
you,
teach differently.
a range of attitudes in my students, and it's really difficult to work with, right? Because the students that are disconnected, you want to help them.
Yeah.
You want to reach out to them, but I think a lot of them are lacking a reason and a motivation to be there. And what do you do for someone like that, right? That's really hard to work with. And on the flip side, we have some really amazing students, and it's a whole spectrum. But it's you naturally gravitate towards people who are
Want to be there and
and reciprocate your enthusiasm.
have
right?
fire in their eyes.
And so that I think it kind of exacerbates some of the situation that these students who are feeling left out or aren't engaged, it can amplify that experience. And so I'm often left wondering, like, what do I do for these students? And I don't know that there's a good answer for that. I think oftentimes we as educators, and I think that this could be a whole conversation for another time, but I think we often think that we have more power than we do, and we're kind of like magicians that can inspire people. And it's like, yeah, maybe a little bit. I think largely people come in with more or less set attitudes, and you can work with that to an extent. I don't think I've ever had the experience, and maybe I'm an outlier here. I don't think I've ever had the experience where I've transformed someone and lit them up, like where they were completely unengaged, and all of a sudden they became somebody different because they sat in on my class. I don't know if you've had an experience like that. But.
Yeah, I think, well, one of the things I've begun to do differently is like, I'm actually, and again, I have the privileges, I can cover this in my class to an extent, right? Like, well, I'm not sure my colleagues completely know the extent to which I essentially raise the flag on the death of modernity to my students, right? Like the modern ways, they're going away, the fossil fuels that support it, right? They're going to become too expensive to extract and the environment's going to be destroyed. We're living in an ecologically diminished world. The future cannot possibly be bright. Best case scenario is it's a little worse than now, and even that window could be closing, right? And so I'm very honest with that. And not that I spend weeks and weeks doom pilling, but I kind of give some reality of like things like species loss and resource short, et cetera. I think by doing that, for a lot of students, it answers to them. Thank you for acknowledging reality, because I think it's really easy for us, and this was me for a long time teaching, to do the things I had as professors, right? The way you grade essays, the way you teach in class, the way you interact with your students is like, well, I had a model and I just kind of uncritically follow that model. Like, oh, it worked for me, right? And it worked for plenty of other people. And I think, again, I think I have this privilege because I teach classes that don't have like necessarily all these rigorous content things. Like if you teach an intro physics class, right? Like if you don't teach certain basic concepts, they're not going to be able to take the upper level classes, right? So like, yes, we have some basic concept like that in education, but it is more fluid. There is a lot more capacity to, tailor the class to what you think matters and what's important. And so by kind of really focusing on this like anti-modernity lens, I felt, I won't claim that all 100% students are reached. No. In fact, there's definitely a percentage of students that tune out with the phones because they don't want to handle the emotion of what I'm saying, right? But for those that are kind of on the fence that are like, yeah, I just sense something's wrong, something's not working, but what you're saying at least is an attempt, maybe they don't even agree with my conclusions, but it's an attempt to address the status quo that you professors were all raised in and the careers and the pensions. Like, we kind of know that's not for us. Like, we're not going to get that. We're not going to get those pensions. We're not going to get the 50 years of employment in a stable field. So we kind of appreciate that you're letting us find a way to process and talk about that. And so I think that's something incumbent for all of us to do, is to kind of find ways. And again, it's certainly easier in education, I think, than a lot of other subjects, but to the extent that I think every professor can help in their own way address what's happening.
Now, I could see that working two ways. On one hand, I think opening the students' eyes to deeper problems in the world seems like that could be I could see it being demotivating to an extent, right? Like if we're going to look at the world with the doomer glasses on, like why build a career? Why try to build anything for myself? Why have a family? Right? Does that, in your opinion, tend to lead students towards a more dismal and hopeless view of the world? Or do they come out of that kind of feeling inspired and motivated somehow? Or does it not really affect personally for them and how they encounter or approach questions of like, what do I do for myself? And how do I approach school and my thoughts of my career?
Of course, it's hard to know, right? Because of the reporting bias. Most of our students are nice, right? And so if they had this really negative nihilist response to it, they might not share that, right? They might not be honest that was their reaction and they're giving up. So I can't speak for the students that might have had negative, but I can speak for the many students who talk of the positive, right? And well, what I say is like, just because you might not be able to be guaranteed a career, it's like, don't think 50 years in the future, right? Like you're going to be out of here in a year or two with your degree, your teaching degree, like you are going to have some years, unknown on years, but you're going to have some years where you're going to make a meaningful impact, right? And especially if you yourself have the curricular liberation, because if you kind of accept that modernity's days are numbered, right, and this whole system we have is slowly unraveling and collapsing, you actually have a lot more freedom to teach what matters, right? What you think matters. And I think as more and more people, administrators and school districts and parents start to slowly get it too, they are also going to care less. And so it's actually this, like, I try to market it, and I think at least a sizable number of students do buy into this metaphor that, like, it's this amazing period of freedom they're going to have, right? Because once you let go of the fact that you've got to do what the system tells you because you've got to, like, keep your job your whole life and et cetera, and then all your kids have to, try to get to college so that they can have lives. Once you let go of that, it's this remarkable capacity for creativity and like, oh, I get to actually have this brief window of teaching where I can kind of do what I think matters and what matters to me rather than like the business as usual standardization of what education should look like.
Yeah, that's an interesting discussion and it's something very relevant for our times too about what should be taught in schools, what needs to be taught, what can't be taught in schools, and how much freedom we have. And typically as college professors, we have, I'd say, it seems like, I've never taught public school. You taught high school?
Yeah, high school for 9 years.
9 years, okay. So you have more experience there than I do, for sure. But my impression is that we have a fair degree of latitude as college professors about what we teach and what we emphasize, at least in our courses. But in, say, high school, isn't the curriculum pretty prescribed? I mean, in New York, for example, we have Regents exams and things like this, and the courses are
They might be dropping, or I think they're getting de-emphasized. Something's happening, I think, with the Regents, but I
haven't heard that. I'm not sure, yeah. But at least, and I don't know if that applies to all classes, but many classes then are kind of geared towards helping students pass or perform well on the Regents exams, right? The point, though, is that things tend to be fairly structured in the high school environment. But you're saying here that we're at a time now, or we're approaching a time when people actually have a fair degree of latitude in what they can talk about.
Right. I don't think they will formally have a fair degree of latitude. Absolutely, they will have more structured expectations. But when you think about like teacher burnout and teacher shortages and just kind of like people dropping like droves in the profession because it's just too hard, it's just too stressful, and it's the pay and the meager benefits are not worth the increasing stress of just what's happening, teaching much larger classrooms, much higher expectations, much more micromanaging, right? Like, so, and there's a big COVID drop off. So I think it's not officially they have more freedom and less structure, but I think if you're a teacher that stays in the school, and what administers more than anything else, like they want you to maintain your classroom, right? That's the biggest thing. Like, don't send
maintain order.
Maintain order, right? Don't have your kids come into the office, right? And at least have them competent enough to pass the next level, right? And to go on. I imagine that increasingly, if you have a well-managed classroom and there's some basic competency things learned, like you're going to be allowed to teach what you want. And I tell students that, right?
So it's kind of coming out of an aspect of desperation
Yeah,
by administrators. Like, I don't care what you do.
Yeah.
Just don't quit on me.
Right.
And don't let don't let any riots start in your classroom.
Exactly. And in that context, it's kind of like what's already been happening in, like, what are they called? The schools, students that have a lot of discipline problems that, like, near dropouts, they create these special programs, right? And, like, in those classrooms, I know teachers, they're like, oh, you do whatever you want. Like, no one cares what you teach in these alternative high schools. That's going to, I think, work its way up the chain, right? Maybe the elite, super wealthy, prestigious schools in Long Island, they'll be the last to get there. But I think a lot of other schools, there's going to be this idea, hey, students seem to like that teacher, and he shows up every day, and she, gets no complaints, maintains order, test scores are okay. Yeah. Oh, they're teaching about the death of modernity and why we all need to learn about indigenous cultures, how they manage better sustainability. Like, well, it doesn't really fit in the science curriculum, I think, but who cares, right? I think that's going to happen more. Right? I believe that's going to happen more.
Interesting. Yeah, I really wonder about the future of standardized testing and what happens there and how that impacts our expectations and standards in school.
Well, you just you see with the SATs, right? More increasingly, universities are dropping that as even.
But there's also a move back. I think I just read this last week that colleges are reconsidering this because it is a useful tool. And so I don't know what's going to happen. I could see this going either way. We're also at a point in time when we're realizing that many of our schools are, if not failing, they're suffering, and we're not serving our students well. But there's going to be a push to hold teachers and schools accountable.
Oh, there are. Oh,
there always is.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. And so I could see, as maybe times get tougher, as things get worse, you could see that emphasis on testing and standardized curricula becoming even stronger. I think I'm more a long range doomer than you. I think your vision of the future is like we got a good decade, right?
I can share off record. You've been slowly moving towards me every year I've known you,
yeah.
Little by little.
Maybe a little bit. I think I'm swinging back, and I think at this point I feel that the world is actually more robust than I thought it was before. Not in forever robust, but I don't think collapse is imminent.
Well, imminent. I mean, imminent. Like, I don't think it's going to happen next year. But
not next year, but like next decade, maybe.
I mean, it's a complex system, of course, but food. Look at food production, right? Food production has been kind of dropping in the past years, right? There's a lot of harvests are failing a lot of places. Farmers are protesting right now all across Europe, right? Artificial fertilizers, which arguably we have to wean ourselves off them because they have all this ecological microbial damage, and poisoning the waterways with the nitrogen runoff, etc. I think that's becoming a lot more expensive. So there are signs already of looming serious food issues now coming, right? Like in the next, harvests process a few years out, but I think even in a few years, mark me as note of saying famines are coming back, right? Like it won't be worldwide everywhere, but those famines we remember from the 80s in Ethiopia and Somalia, those are going to start to reemerge, I think, easily within 5 years.
All right, so here's the thing I've been thinking about and wondering about. Maybe you have more insight and info on this than I do. When the war in Ukraine started a few years ago, there was pretty wide expectation that Ukraine, being essentially the breadbasket of the world, or at least Eastern Europe, the war there and the blockades in the Black Sea by the Russians would lead to grain shortages and significant famines. That really hasn't transpired. So doesn't that, it's a small single example, but doesn't that kind of suggest that the world, in a sense, is more robust and finds ways to compensate for these things? Or does it not? Or is that totally different?
Well, would you say that when you go shopping for food now that it's not making a much more significant,
prices have gone up.
Right. What I would say that's what's happening is it's the pain rather than it's not the food shortage issues are not concentrated yet, where you're getting multi breadbasket failures and famines. You're getting a global shortage, but not yet famine worthy on the world crisis level. But it's showing up in the food inflation everywhere in the world, right? Everywhere has various degrees of food inflation. Foodflation, yes, or shrinkflation, where the price stays the same, but the
plates get smaller or whatever.
I think you'd be hard pressed to find a U.S. citizen today that says, oh no, the food prices in the supermarket are not so bad, or they're just as good as they were 3 years ago, right? So like that's a way in which you're seeing like the first wave of the
Maybe
impacts.
it's the first wave. I don't know. I feel unconvinced on that point. I feel like as time has gone on, I become more of a believer in the free market system, right? Like, isn't this maybe just the market's
You should read
compensating?
late Victorian Holocausts.
I mean, but that's kind of a success story, though, right? Like, if the food prices go up,
People eat less.
people they eat less, or maybe they eat out less. I mean, there's going to be an adjustment in the markets to compensate for the supply. And the point, though, is that those adjustments have taken place, and if, like as you said, they've kind of been dispersed, but there hasn't been any like famine that has transpired that is clearly a result of the war in Ukraine or anything. So, to me, that suggests maybe the market forces are actually a force for good here, and are distributing the load in a way that is very helpful. Okay.
The role of the market in food distribution, I really believe that's a whole other topic, which might be even outside both of our expertise.
Oh, it's way outside my expertise.
Yeah. Let's put a pin in that, perhaps for a future.
Okay,
episode.
all right.
But going back to how do we get from food shortages from standards at high school?
Oh, I don't know.
But okay. So I see what you're saying about robustness, right? Like, and I know this, having been a quote self-identified doomer at least since 2016, maybe 2014. Like, I've noticed in my own life, like, yes, some of the projections that were made back in 2016, like, things have not fallen apart as soon. On the other hand, like, I mean, have you been following climate headlines? Like, the sea ocean temperatures and like it's way
Things are accelerating. I've been following that. But we also don't know what the economic and social ramifications of that are. Right? I mean,
we know they're not going to be good. We don't know is the extent, how bad, how soon, but we know they're not going to be good.
Agreed. And then there's certainly a timescale matter that comes into that. Probably the biggest thing there is going to be the sea level rise, and that's going to eventually force large-scale displacements of people. And loss of arable land is probably also a big factor
all the
there as
rice
well.
that's growing along, right? Yeah,
I mean, down in the deltas and things like this. Yeah, right. So there's going to be all sorts of impacts there, but you know that's a little bit longer term. That's not decadal type scales. That's more of century type scales.
No,
right?
Sea level specifically is not as imminent, and even that, like you said, you can kind of like move away from the city. I'm thinking more of things like heat waves and droughts and floods. Those are already significantly happening. But again, just in terms of like robustness and the doomer spectrum, like look at what doomers were saying in 2016 about what the climate would look like in 2023, and look at your mainstream IPCC climate scientists, right? The doomers were like on target, right? Like their things of like what everyone was dismissed as saying what 2023 looks like, that's what's happening. The worst case scenario, go back to any papers written in 2016 or 2010 or 2005, look at how they model things. The absolute worst case scenario is what's playing out in all of our trends.
With the IPCC reports, they always give a range of models, and they have kind of the low, the medium, and the high is kind of typically how they present it. And are you saying that the reports that were coming out from the IPCC, say in 2016, where we're at now is beyond like the worst case scenario they were predicting at that point?
Sometimes it's even beyond, yeah. Well, I don't even know how the IPCC formed, but like, so just like as a hypothetical example, how those reports work is, let's say you have three climate scientists who study sea level rise, right? One of them will be like, oh, I predict 1 meter by 2050. Another group says 2 meters by 2050. And the third group says 3 meters by 2050, right? Like you might think, okay, the precautionary principle would suggest that we assume 3 meters. The worst, like, no, they don't do that. Okay, we'll do the average, right? We'll kind of like take the compromise. 2 meters, like, no, they do it's science is based on consensus, right? So like, well, we can all agree, right? 1 meter sea level rise by 2050, and I'm just making it up. I'm not saying that that's what's in the IPCC, but yeah, and that's what goes in the report. So the consent, there's ranges.
That's the most. I mean, you're right. That's the thing that there's the most confidence in. But they always present multiple models and multiple possible outcomes.
But the outliers within the ranges, those are the ones that have played out reality, if not worse. Yeah. Like for every measure, right? For every measure you're studying, then there's no disputing that. Like go look at the IPCC reports of years past and see what's happening today is at the worst case scenario or worse than the worst case scenario, right? So when you look at that, you have to say, like, the doomers are seeing something, and you know, scientists have long known there's a correlation between depression and realism, right? Like people that realistically see the world tend to be depressed, right? So I think there's something to be said about like not having an optimistic frame, how a depressive frame actually helps you process reality better. But yeah, but at the flip side is, yeah, I will say there is a certain robustness that can handle shocks, but looking at the level of shocks, I start to wonder how long that robustness can hold itself up.
And I guess that's the part that has surprised me and I've been thinking about more lately is the robustness part. Like change is happening, change is going to continue to happen and it will accelerate, no doubt. But maybe we're underestimating in a sense our ability to adapt to those changes. I think that there's a large uncertainty in that, right? To what degree can we adapt? And again, there will be displacements of people. There will be land that is currently arable that is not arable.
Okay, do you know when we started farming, like when it kind of really took off?
10,000?
Yeah, about that.
Right.
Do you know what else happened 10,000 years ago? About this magic.
Oh yeah, you've mentioned this before.
The Holocene, the magical temperature stability, right? Like all of a sudden had not really happened as long as human species, 200, 300,000 years old. We've not had this period of like 10,000 years of temperature stability. That's why agriculture exists. It only exists as a mass scale of the vast majority of calories generated because of temperature stability. We're already leaving that zone. We have not actually had agriculture where we are now, which is already 1.5 Celsius, and it depends on when you start your baseline from. But we're leaving the zone of agriculture stability, so I don't see agriculture as we know it functioning very much longer on a mass scale because it'll be too hard for the crops we grow are used to certain temperature ranges. They're used to being grown in certain climates with certain, microbes that thrive in those climates and pollinators that thrive in those climates. And as all that changes and ecosystems shift and species die off in a warming world, I think we're even like, I guess you'd call me super doomer. Like there's like in the doomer light community, there'll be people who talk about, well, we all just got to go back to farming, working the land. And yeah, sure, that's a start. But I'm not clear that even farming will be possible as a reliable source of food generation as the temperature continues to warm past levels no humans have ever been alive for and past any level that agriculture has actually functioned in.
Well, that's fair. I mean, yeah, we're definitely on an upwards trajectory here, so we're heading into uncharted territory.
But yeah, going back to that what does it mean for students to be in this situation? I don't think most elementary, high school professors are teaching about how bad things are, regardless of your assessment of our capacity to adapt and how robust we are. And so, but they're hearing the messages, right? There's no way, even if you don't seek out the news and even if you're only looking at cat videos on TikTok, like there's no way it's not seeping into your brain, the headlines, right? That are just kind of everywhere about like, oh, lost this species, like, oh, this terrible environmental thing happened, like, oh, right. And so I think a lot of students like have probably this sense of dread, but don't feel we are addressing that dread at all because we're doing business as usual, right? We're kind of carrying on, teaching the courses like they were taught to us so they can march on in the system and build their credits.
Yeah, right. And what are you going to do when you're on that spaceship traveling, hurtling through space with no ability to turn around? Like, I mean, you can sit there and you can stare out the window and fret and be anxious all day, or you could just, I don't know, do your job on the ship.
Well, yeah, I would actually be not so bleak as the spaceship, right? Because the spaceship was clear doom for all. Whereas, at least in our situation, I'm not optimistic that we can manage a better future, but we can at least slow the descent. We can at least prepare communities for the storms ahead.
Yeah. Like Mark Zuckerberg will be fine with his 1,600 acre compound in Hawaii.
Well, will he?
There will be a song.
well, I mean, I guess like how many years of canned food preserves can you buy? Okay, I guess Mark Zuckerberg could buy 50 years of
yeah. He can probably live out his lifetime with his wealth, right? Like,
well, but even wealth, like what is wealth, right? Like when.
Well, it's
What does wealth get you when there's no more global
if you
system?
decently plan in advance,
Right.
like
if you
it's.
get hard assets, hard,
I mean,
tractors
he's
and
building
land.
a doomer compound in Hawaii,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like he's planning for it.
But why'd you bring him up as an example? Like, why do we care about how he manages?
Oh, just that there will be some people that will survive, and the billionaires will be fine. Is what I'm saying.
Maybe, yeah. I mean,
As well as other people.
well, okay, but like the billionaires, right? Like, so they have maybe doctors, and like, how do you, if you don't have a dentist and a doctor and a lot of other like carpenters, right? What is your life like without those people? And if those people are there, like, well, why would they stay loyal to him, right? Because like, oh, okay, so you just happened to invent this Facebook thing and you got all this money, but now society collapsed, there's all this stored food. Oh, I have architectural skills, I have carpentry skills, I have mechanical skills, I have gardening skills. What the fuck do you have? You don't have anything. I think the billionaires that are actually empaths or really psychopaths that are really convincing empaths, they will have built the relationships so that the useful workers in their compounds will stay loyal to them. But I think your average billionaire, like when it comes down to it, like, yeah, actually, what value add is Mark Zuckerberg providing to us? Like, yeah, he's not actually really bringing any life skills. So, yeah, let's get rid of him and more food for the rest of us.
I guess if he keeps his stash of beans carefully guarded, he might be okay. For a while.
Is he the one guarding it? Because if it's his mercenaries, why would his mercenaries turn on him?
This is why you pay the people close to you well, right?
No, right, yeah, to build the future loyalty. Yeah.
Exactly. You got to build that loyalty.
But no, I actually think there will be. I actually think indigenous communities that already have suffered trauma and actually know how to read the land and live off the land. I think maybe the first generation, the billionaires in their bunkers might have a better state of living. But fast forward a decade or two, like past the collapse of the fossil fueled world, like it'll be those people that actually have a relationship to living ecosystems that actually have any kind of chance of getting through the bottleneck of the troubles ahead.
No one's sure when a collapse or a shift is going to come, but I feel certain it will at some point. And I think it's, like I said, it's a little further off maybe than you envision.
What's your take? What's your?
If I had to pick a number,
I had to pick a number. Feet to the fire.
Well, a number for what?
Okay,
obviously,
and it's not a collapse, right? People push back. Oh, not everything's going to fall apart at the same time, or it's going to be catabolic collapse, whatever. Yeah. No, I mean, okay. At what point? At what year, and I assume at least you're willing to admit it's going to be the 21st century, right? Sometime this century. Like, what year in this century do you think, if you're alive, you would look back and be like, damn, shit's really bad right now? Like, what year do you think you would say that?
Well, I think it depends. Again, what do you mean by shit's really bad right now?
You are not sure that you can survive the year because you don't have confidence you'll have either the resources to survive, or you have resources, but armed gun folk might come and take it from you.
So that's actually my larger concern. I'm less concerned at this point about severe climate change destroying things than I am about something like civil war. Mm-hmm. So I think that is probably
more proximate to you.
Well, it's more proximate. I think it's also going to be the thing that's more likely to change our lives in a very dramatic way.
In the U.S., you mean specifically?
Yeah. Well, I think that's certainly a possibility. When you look at what's happening out there and the way things are going, I see that type of thing, a large political upheaval, as being a much more
immediate threat,
and disruptive threat than something like climate change, which I think is going to be a longer term thing that hopefully, in some capacity, we can adapt to.
Well,
I actually don't think I'd say in terms of the climate change thing, I think it's beyond 21st century.
Well, you keep talking about climate, and by the way, if this is actually published anywhere, please make a comment or send an email. Happy to send a presentation. The name of my talk was "Why Trees Can't Sequester Mercury: Why Climate is the Wrong Focus." I actually think climate is not the most serious environmental threat we have to worry about. I think biodiversity loss and novel entities and nitrogen, phosphorus, destabilization and runoff, arguably land system change, possibly microplastics, right? We could have this whole thing where, what was that woman who wrote the book about, like, microplastics are causing possibly, and all these other toxic chemicals, a dramatic fall in sperm production. So I actually agree with you. Climate, I don't think is the most serious thing, but it gets all the press.
I guess I was using climate as kind of
As
a
a
proxy for the
environmental
larger
things. Yeah,
environmental issues that we're talking about. Yeah, maybe I'm being too optimistic here.
Well, it's good we have this balance, right? If we were both doomers, right, we wouldn't have a challenging and engaging
Who knows?
dialogue.
Yeah, maybe you're being too much of a doomer. I don't know. Who knows, right? None of us have a crystal ball.
Maybe
here.
I am, but all I can say is that like the projections I had are more accurate than the IPC scientists, and not because I'm a genius, just because I guess I don't have the same tunnel vision. And being occasionally depressed helps me see things clear. I think also not having children, that could be a big difference, right? I suspect there could be a large difference between optimism and pessimism, whether or not you have children, right? Because I know, let's be honest, right? Like, I have an investment in the future, right? I care about other people and species, and I have nieces and nephews that I love. But at the end of the day, like, my direct progeny don't exist. And so I imagine to have children, it's a lot harder to, right? To really, like, don't you imagine there's some part of you psychologically that, like, really doesn't want to fully embrace that possibility because that's just a horrible thing for you to imagine for your children?
Well, I mean, it's a terrible thing to think about. Like, if they were to undergo some great tragedy or suffering, like, no one wants to think about that. I guess there's some motivation there. Well, there's certainly, look, I don't know how much control I have over changing anything. I think we all, maybe not we all, but many people like to think
No one's
that,
steering the ship.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think that there's greater ability to change things than there actually is. Like, oh, we'll just stop using fossil fuels and it'll be great. Like,
fossil fuels is everything. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
what are you going to drink out of, right?
How are you feeding half the world at least?
Exactly. I mean, it's just like it's just not even a tenable position to start from. Or I mean, or what if we just converted to solar electricity?
But we're just going to use more electricity. It's got no impact
I
at
mean,
all.
whatever. It's just like all of these things you can point to as so-called solutions are like essentially non-starters for me as solutions, right? And
but it does not how does that not make you a doomer, right? When you think of all the like proposed solutions, like aren't actually going to work, like how does that not make you have a more negative assessment on our capacity to handle the troubles ahead?
I guess it comes back to the idea that I think our troubles are more long-term than they are short-term. And
these dilemmas you're pointing out, we're not going to pay the price for them as soon as I and others might think.
I think that's right. Yeah, I'd say that's a fair assessment of my perspective here. I think things are going to take a lot longer. Again, over things that we've seen over the last couple of years, not just the war in Ukraine. COVID was a big eye-opener for me as well. I think we experienced that things are actually far more robust than we thought they were. And the biggest thing that set us back was actually our anxiety and our fear.
Yeah.
Right. So you might agree with me on that, right?
Oh, well, 100%.
Yeah. So, and not to dismiss the real, threat that COVID presented, at least to some individuals, right? People clearly died because of it. But it wasn't a thing that was, threatening our existence as a civilization, right? Like it wasn't.
We were more threatened by the reactions, like the lockdowns and all those other things. So yeah, fear was very much driving.
And I think this is the perspective that I've taken, is that I don't want to live in fear. I'm kind of halfway a doomer, certainly not where you are on things. But I think that the decision I've made is this: regardless of whether things collapse next year, 10 years, 100 years, or 1,000 years, I don't think I have any significant ability to do anything about it in my life, other than in the microscopic sense that I am one small voice in a large democratic society, and I can, in a small way, advocate for rational decisions.
Or you can compost and add fertility to soil.
Yeah, right, because that makes a difference.
It makes a difference, at least in your backyard. Or the warlords that take over your land and they want to feed their children with your healthier soil, like those children.
So there you
will
go.
do
So
better.
you can offer them a tribute of compost.
Children will have healthier food, whether or not you have the land anymore or not. Yeah.
But I think it's I've just made the decision, like I'm not gonna worry about things that are beyond my control. And you asked earlier, like about my thoughts about like my children's lives and what might they confront. Like I don't know, and I'm not gonna lose sleep over it because there's nothing I can do about it either way.
Oh yeah, I think we're totally on the same page there. I don't think you would perceive me as a fear-based person.
No, you're very cheery for a doomer. You're like, I think you break the mold here.
I think I can't say all doomers are cheery, but it's something liberating. Well, in that sense, we're kind of in the same page, right? It's about I'm letting go of the future I was kind of implicitly or maybe explicitly promised. You are accepting you don't have control to really shape the future. So in that sense, we're both kind of saying we're both not letting fear dominate our lives. I guess where we differ is our analysis of the data and the message we want to send to others about how they may or may not want to, quote, prepare. And I don't mean prepare like buy your bunker and your guns and chin, more just psychologically prepare, right? Like, for example, if you are currently slaving away at a job you hate, right? And for this idea that like, well, I'm just going to make a lot of money so that I can I'll go on the cruises when I'm retired. Like, if you're 25 years old, let that shit go, right? Because you're not going to have that money you'll be lucky there is even air transport, right, in 40 years.
And I would say the opposite. I would say, put your nose down, get to work hard, and
on something you love. Because if you're only working if you're only working hard because you're delaying your joy for the savings, that's a terrible way to spend your life. Because if you read the data, I would say you spend enough time, you're going to conclude, I'm not going to have that life. Wow, I slaved away at a job that I hate for nothing, right? So it's more about raising awareness so people use their limited time now better, right? That's more what I guess I'm bigger advocate for. And for teachers, let go of teaching the bullshit that doesn't matter. If you actually have what I believe will be more autonomy and freedom in the classroom, how can you better teach things like values and care and love of natural systems and love of other species and love of each other, right? That's really it's not because I think as a doomer, I don't believe if we all just change our ways, the bright future comes, right? I don't think that. But I think we're on the same pages.
Yeah.
Fear is no way to live.
Well, I think those messages you're sharing with your students are good. And I'm glad that you're doing it because I don't do any of that. And I'm on the other extreme.
Hey, man, well, you want to have a guest lecturer come in? I could throw a little physics content in there to make it, I could talk about heat death of the universe. And
yeah, I'd love to have you. You came through my energy and sustainability class a couple years
destroyed
ago.
solar panels, right? Is that what I did there?
I forget. Yeah. I was expecting you to talk about, not regreening.
Rewilding.
Rewilding. Yeah, I was expecting you to talk about that.
I didn't talk about that?
I don't think you did because I told,
Oh, they asked me questions. I just responded to the questions they asked, right?
I think that was maybe how it went. Yeah, because I'd spent the day before talking with the students. We actually did some calculations about rewilding.
Oh, I don't know why you should have forced my hand.
I think we went down a different path.
Okay, different rabbit hole.
That was fun. Yeah, we should.
And interdisciplinary, right? That's kind of the holistic systems thinking kind of education that I think is better preparing us for the uncertain future.
Yeah. Yeah, who knows where things will go?
Who
I
knows?
certainly don't. I have no idea what the future brings.
Nope.
I think it's an exciting time to be alive.
It is an exciting time to be alive.
There's a lot of challenges out there in the world and also in higher ed.
Which we could talk more about another time. All right, brother.
Well,
it's
been fun
chatting, as always.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. And if any of our listeners out there have comments or thoughts or topics
on episode what?
On episode 1, if you have thoughts for our next episode, feel free to drop those in the comments.
Episode 1.
All right. Thank you very much. Good night, folks.
Good night, all.